Hey guys, how's it going? In this video, in case you didn't know by clicking on the video or seeing the thumbnail or seeing the icon image as it's come up, we're talking about a basic deck building template here today. By the way, we make lots of great content here on the channel, and if you haven't already, please think about subscribing to the channel. It really helps out the channel grow and make more great content for you. And as our analytics show, 95.6% of people aren't subscribed to the channel. So if you aren't subscribed to the channel, do please think about subscribing to the channel. So we're talking about a basic deck building template here today. And like, I know that a lot of other channels out there have done their own sort of style of this, whatnot, and I will do some more stuff like this, more basic sort of how to build decks, how do you decide what to play, getting inspiration to play, you know, what you want to do, things like that. Here on the channel eventually. I want to do much more stuff. You guys can also just tell me stuff that you want to see as well. That really helps out as well because, you know, I'm here to deliver what you guys want to see. You know, like, that's it. Like, if you guys want to see stuff, you have to let me know. You have to share the video around, give me likes, give me comments, do these things so that I can go, hey, look, you know, 500 people want some sort of, you know, video like this. Okay, I'll make it then, you know, like, so, and then more people will go, wow, hey, look, we can, you know, these are the things we want. Hey, I'll bring them to you, you know, so that's how it sort of works here. But anyway, as I say, I'll get back to what we're actually talking about today. We're talking about a basic deck building, you know, guide, essentially. And it's one of those things that, you know, when you're starting out and whatever, I think that the best thing, and I might do a little bit more of a discussion on this or a video on this for new players specifically, but I think like getting into Commander and when you start is like you're not going to build a deck from scratch realistically, I don't think, or not really. Like you might just go, okay, what's a deck list that somebody's using or whatever, or what's the, you know, the average deck or whatever that I can find for this commander, or where's a precon for any deck or whatever that I can find, or somebody's got a deck, let me have, you know, one of their old decks, or have a budget deck of some sort. You know, that's how you get in as a newer player. You just get in through these easy to get, you know, thrown together decks that somebody has, or, you know, whatever, things like that, a precon, or just, you know, an average deck list or whatnot. Not like I'm going to sit here and I'm going to look at a, you know, commander and I'm going to figure out, you know, okay, do I want this card in there? Do I want that card in there? Maybe some people will, but overall I don't think many people will actually go through this process, and people won't consider, or most newer people won't consider, well, do I need 38 lands or do I need 37 lands or whatever it is for this deck, you know, and how many ramp do I need, and how many card draw do I need, and how much, you know, spot removal do I need, and how much, you know, whatever else do I need in this deck specifically. So it's one of those things that you start to do this thing where you're starting to level up in playing the game and going, you know what, I've played these decks, or I've played decks for a little while that, you know, have been precons or whatever, or, you know, basic decks, just, you know, off of EDH rec, you know, whatever, just, I've looked at the list and I've put it in and proxied it or whatever, and I've got the cards eventually and whatnot, that sort of thing. And, you know, that's what I've done. You know, I've just sort of gone through the whole thing, and or just got a pre-con or whatever, you know. So it's one of those things that it's sort of a level up moment to be like, you know what, I want to sit down, you know, take a few minutes, look around at some decks, and I might get again into what interests me, but find what interests me to build, go about like figuring out how can I build it, and then just building it with like the knowledge of like, okay, yes, I do need X amount of card draw, probably at least roughly for this deck, X amount of ramp, X amount of this, X amount of that, whatnot. So, and I want how much else is like my actual synergy, like pieces and things that are actually doing what I want to do, that are on theme, essentially. So that's what I'm really talking about here, is all those bits and pieces that go into a deck. So, yeah, it is a nice little level up moment for some people, and I've certainly done that as well in the past, and whatnot. And I remembered, like, building one of my first decks and being just like, it is overwhelming sometimes when you want to build your first deck or whatever from scratch, well, not from scratch, but from sort of scratch, and you're just like working with like a few cards that you have, or you go, well, Sol Ring and whatnot is one of my cards probably for the most part, even though I disagree with that whole thing and whatnot, but we're not going to get into that one today, but we might get into it one of these days. But anyway, again, like, you sort of work with a few cards and you go, hey, I've got this card and I've got that card, so those probably will go in because they're all right cards. And I think it's one of those traps as well when you're a newer player. It's just like, well, everyone seems to be playing these cards in most pre-cons or whatever, so I'll just throw them in and it's good enough, it does the job, whatnot. Like Cultivate and Kadama's Reach, they're just fine, they do the job, whatnot. They're not specifically, whatever, too bad or too good or whatever, that, you could ever say that it was the right or wrong decision too much. It's just a deck that I've thrown together. But anyway, yeah, you think about some of those aspects more so when you're looking at a deck and saying, okay, well, how does this deck actually function more so? And sometimes it's an upgrade, like, as well. Sometimes you just throw a deck together thinking, oh, yes, I've researched this, and then you go, well, you know what, this card and this card, yeah, they're doing what I want, but is there any better cards that could be doing what I want or whatever? And there are some cards that you go, you know what, this card just isn't really doing what I want. It is in the deck and it's kind of cool and kind of funny sometimes, or does something sometimes, but not nearly enough or whatever. But I'm not really talking about upgrading. I want to talk about upgrading maybe a bit more in another video, but we do deck techs here, so it is relevant to some of that sort of style of stuff when you're thinking about this. But how do, or what numbers wise should you basically shoot for when you're sitting down and going, okay, I want to build a deck. How many lands should I theoretically put in, at least roughly, or how much this, how much that? So I'm going to put this disclaimer out, and a lot of people put these disclaimers out to say that not every deck will fall into exactly what I'm going to say, because, like, I'm going to say this for CDH especially. CDH is completely different. So if you're looking for CDH, like, guidelines and whatnot, I'm not the guy to talk to. I'm not the guy to talk about it, so I have no clue about that sort of stuff, really. I sort of know it exists and hear about it and whatnot, and here and there and whatnot. I know they cut a lot of lands and whatnot, and they focus more on mana rocks, very cheap mana rocks, at least CMC-wise, not money-wise, but anyway, they focus on efficiency and whatnot, so it's a lot of, difference than what, I will say regular EDH is or casual EDH is. So yeah, like, again, but anyway, these are for general EDH, like, okay, and I know, like, I'm going to say this especially for lands, because the MDFC cards that came in Zendikar Rising changed quite a bit of what I used to think was the correct way to sort of do, lands in your deck. Now, again, if you're playing like Omnath or whatever, or some of those more like land-hungry commanders that need lands all the time, you're obviously going to need much more than what I'm going to suggest. And if you're maybe mono-red aggro or mono-white aggro of some sort, I don't know that really exists that much. But again, if most of your spells and whatnot, you know, you've got a bunch of little soldiers and whatnot, or a bunch of little goblins in your deck, and your curve doesn't go much higher than, you know, 4 or 5, then of course this is a bit different because you're not needing that much more mana and you're not needing nearly as much ramp, so that's a little bit different. But again, I'm not going to talk about the extreme ends. I'm going to talk about something that's in the middle and just something to start with. But again, MDFCs have changed things a fair bit now. I think in each color, I think there's maybe 1 or 2, depending on what color you're in, MDFCs that are really quite good and worth running. So I would at least run 1 or 2 MDFCs that are in your colors, and you know, those cards are usually pretty obvious which ones are the better ones or whatnot. If it's a land, sometimes it's just fine because it's just another tapped land that you can play, and you know, in the early game or mid game or whatever, and just like, it's fine, it's a land, it comes in tapped, whatever, except for the mythic ones. But I don't think many of the mythic ones are that good, really. Like the green one and the red one, I don't think are that good. The green one's okay, but I wish it would actually get you more creatures or whatever to hand or whatever, just something else. You know, so I don't really think it's that good. It only gets 1 creature, it plays it immediately, sure. If it's small, it, you know, gives it some counters, whatever, but that's not that relevant to me. I think the white one's actually pretty good, but again, I just don't think it's at all that good. But I'm not going to rate all of these. But again, like the black one's amazing. So I don't think the blue one's actually nearly that good. But I know a lot of people will disagree with me and whatnot. But again, I just don't think it's that good. But then again, I don't like preserve like maximum hand size as being that good. You know, like, it's an effect and it exists, and if it comes tacked on something that's generically okay, then it's just fine. But otherwise, I just don't think it's much worth it. Sometimes it is, because it's like, oh, I'll just draw 7 and now I have no maximum hand size, so now I have 14 cards in hand. Well, I definitely don't want to discard most of them. But then again, I just find that it's often not that relevant, so yeah, whatever. But anyway, MDFCs have changed things. So there's maybe 1 or 2 in your colors that probably you want to run. So that cuts your lands down, or at least your basic lands down a little bit. And I still think you want to shoot for about 38 lands, and that includes MDFCs. Now, again, if you're lower mana curved style deck, then you want less lands than that. If you're a much higher mana curve deck, stroke, you actually actively need lands in your deck, you want more than that. So, but I still think you want to shoot for about 38 lands, at least roughly around there. You can go down to 37 or up to 39 if you really feel like that's where you want to be at. You know, within 1 or 2 is just fine. It doesn't really make that much difference, I don't think, to most people, at least. To me, I always want to put in more, because I'm just like, well, even if it's a dead card later, just earlier, I just want them. And I'm always finding that I'm always fetching out lands, so it's just one of those things that I find it just happens anyway. So it's just like, well, it's going to happen. So I always want lands, so it's never a dead card to me, especially since I play so many landfall style decks, because it's like, well, they're doing something actively for me, so it's not just, oh, it's another land. Oh well, you know, it's a land. It gives me this. It gives me that. You know, like it gives me something rather than it just being, you know, something else. But anyway, again, you know, that is another effect that sometimes you think about. But yeah, it does depend. But again, shoot for 38 if you can get a couple of the MDFCs that are in your colors into your deck. Like again, it depends on what. If you're a 2-color deck, then you have 4 MDFCs, maybe, probably, and then, you know, you have still 38 lands, but in reality you have, like, what is it, 34 lands, really, and, you know, 4 of your lands are MDFCs, so it makes more sense. But then again, when you start going up in colors, I think you sort of stick to the 8 or whatever. You stick to the best 1 or 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 or so that are in your colors. Once you start getting to 3, and then when you get to 4, you really want to cut to the best 4, and when you get to 5, you want to cut to the best definitely 3 to 4. It's one of those things, but again, you know, it does depend on what you really want to do and whatnot, and what colors you're in. But again, or what combination of colors you're in. But again, you want to find the ones that are in your colors, the best couple, the best 2 or 3 to 4 or whatever, and then just go from there. So yeah, but anyway, next I will discuss ramp options, and I think that nowadays ramp has changed a fair bit in our format. It is harder to justify, and I sort of said this in my getting nitpicky with mana rocks, and I also said it or similar at least ish statement in getting nitpicky with mana ramp, or whatever I was calling that video there. You know, that you can't really run much of the stuff that goes past, you know, it depends on what deck you're in, but again, for the most part, anything that's more than 1 or 2 mana, you can't really run. It just doesn't help you that much. And I don't subscribe to the whole Chromox sort of CDH, you know, putting in all of those 0 mana rocks and whatnot or whatever, you know, that doesn't, or well, not mana rocks, but sort of mana effects, Lotus Petal or whatever, things like that, or Jeweled Lotus, things like that, because cards that are like that are fast acceleration, and really they're a one-off effect. And you don't really want that in regular EDH for the most part. There are some decks that do want it, but not really. It just doesn't really do enough for you. You want ramp that sticks around and stays around. But you don't want anything really too much that goes above 1 or 2 mana. Once you get to 2 mana, you get most of your signets. If you're in 1 color, it's a little bit more difficult, but, you know, again, for the most part, you want all the ones that you can get, which is basically just Sol Ring and Wayfarer's Bauble. You only want Wayfarers if you're not in green. You know, if you're in an artifact deck, then they're even better, but, you know, you don't need to be artifact central to, you know, need these. But again, I think those you would probably run. I think that some people run, certain cards, whatever it is, Expedition Map, it's ramp, because they often go get a land that can ramp them, or ramp them further along or whatnot, like Gaia's Cradle or Cabal Coffers or whatnot. But unless you've actually got those cards, I don't count that card as ramp, because it's just a fetch for another land. And, you know, unless you've got Nykthos or these other cards that actually produce a lot of mana, then I don't really think, unless you've got Field of the Dead, but then again, that's not ramp again. It's your best land, sure, and maybe you can run it, but I don't think it's really ramp. But a lot of people count it as ramp because they go, oh, well, I'll go get Cabal Coffers, I'll go get Guy's Cradle, I'll go get the most powerful land I've got. But again, yeah, I don't count that. But then it's 2 mana, you've got all of your signets and talismans. If you're in 2 colors, you've got still Arcane Signet for 1 color decks. You've got Mind Stone. You've got a whole bunch of other 2 mana rocks that are really good. Liquid Metal Torque that just came out in Commander, not Commander Legends, in Modern Horizons 2. See, that's how fast these sets have gone past, because I'm still talking about Commander Legends, and it was last year. But still, yeah, there's so much stuff at 2 that you don't really need to dive too much into 3 mana or more that much. You can put in some that are really helpful for you if, like, there's some that are at 3 that are amazingly good. Because I actually think the one that's from Kaldheim, the one that turns into 8 mana rocks, essentially, after 8 turns or whatever, is pretty darn good. The blue one that basically time twisters you into a new hand and sacrifices itself when it gets 12 time counters on it isn't too bad for certain decks as well. That one isn't too bad. Like, the ones that are really amazing, like, even though Command Sphere, I still say that's not that great, it's okay. And if you're in a deck that struggles with card draw, I might put it in. And Hedron Archive, same thing. It's not great, but I would consider it in a deck that, struggles with card draw. So those are the few that are really, really playable and, I would consider. But there's a very limited number. I know that a few people like the new Strixhaven Stadium, and it's not even that new, I know that, but still, a lot of people like that because it's an alternate win condition, essentially. I don't really like it, but I understand why people like it, because people go, oh, well, if I just happen to kill people, I happen to kill people with it. It's just an extra thing that I get as a free thing on this mana rock. But, to me, I don't think you get your cards worth. I know some people are high on it. I'm not very high on it. But, yeah, there are certain ones at 3 that are okay and do something. Either later on when you go, oh, well, I don't really need it now. Like Command Sphere, as I said, just draw another card, cantrip. For free, or for 2, basically, which, isn't too bad, and, Hedron Archive drawing you 4 cards, or drawing you 2 cards for 4, that's a fairly decent going rate, on a thing that sometimes, you play on turn 4 and it, sits around for a few turns and you make a bunch of mana off it, and then you go, oh, well, I don't need it anymore, or whatever. But again, it's still fine. But anyway, I think for like mana rocks and for ramp, you want roughly to shoot for 10 pieces. You want to have at least 10 pieces that are in your deck, and that's pretty good. And there's a very good reason why a lot of people find themselves struggling in games and whatnot. It's that they don't either have enough ramp or enough lands or enough card draw. So, when you have the basics and have, the right number, or at least roughly the right number of lands and the right number of mana rocks and whatnot, at least you've got, like you think to yourself, geez, I've got the odds to, get a land or get ramp early. And that's why you want your ramp early, is because if you go, oh, I'm sitting here with 2 lands and I haven't drawn my 3rd, if you top deck a Signet or whatever, a 2 mana rock, you can immediately play it. You're just like, okay, cool, I play it, So if you top deck a 3 mana rock, you're like, oh, cool, well, I can't play that. So what do I do now? Like, or if you got all these 4 mana or 5 mana or 6 mana rocks, it's like, oh, great, I can't play those. What am I going to do now? Like, yeah, so that's why you want them early. You want to accelerate early to get ahead early and get get going early. You want those early turns to matter. And later on in the game, you're just like, oh, well, it's something I can perhaps discard to something or sacrifice to something or whatever, utilize in some other way, hopefully. So they're that good. You know, we talk about these 4 quadrants of the game, essentially. Beginning and set up, whatever. So sort of establishing and whatnot. At parity, so, you know, no one's really ahead, no one's really behind, or, you know, the game's just chugging along and whatnot, but not much is really happening. When you're ahead and when you're behind. So, you know, when you're ahead, these cards aren't that good. They can do something, but they're not that good. You know, when you're behind, they're really good because it's like, oh, now I can catch up. Like, so, and being behind is usually being like still in the early parts of the game as well. So, yeah, that sort of makes sense. You're going to start the game, you know, with not very much. So you're behind, you know, somebody for the most part, unless you're going first or whatever. Or unless, you know, like, no one else is really doing anything, and then you're ahead, so it helps you get ahead. So that's good. Card draw, again, so one of the biggest things that's, you know, part of a deck, and you want card draw that really synergizes with what you're doing for the most part. So it does depend on what you're doing. Like, so there is some decks that have lower levels of like card draw, card advantage support for their archetypes and whatnot. So it is better often to choose archetypes that have more advantage built into them, but not to say that you can't play those other types. So it is harder to shoot for the right numbers in some of those archetypes. So just keep that in mind, and you might want to look at some cards in other ways and be like, okay, well, this isn't literally drawing cards or whatever. It's not that. It's more card advantage, and it will get cards into my hand and get cards into play, and, you know, or will give me a way to do so. So, yeah, but still, I think you want at least 10 pieces of card draw as well, just to keep the gas flowing, you know, like, once you start, you know, getting into things, you want to be drawing 1 or 2, 3 or 4 cards a turn, you know, like, you don't want to just sit there and be like, oh, okay, well, all I do is draw my card for turn, play my land for turn. Yeah, so all you don't want to just untap, you know, take your turn, draw your card, and then play a land and be like, oh, well, that was all I could do because, you know, that's all I drew. You want to untap and draw and be like, okay, well, I play this thing, and then I draw and I draw and I draw and I draw from this, and draw 2 or 3 things, and then refill your hand all the time, and, you know, be you know, functioning and getting along and finding more cards to play more cards and whatnot. So, you know, card draw finds your ramp. Ramp helps you hit your card draw. So they work well together. So it's all part of the game plan, essentially, to ramp and to draw cards for the most part, no matter what you're doing, because you need cards and you need ramp. You know, you need ramp to draw cards, you need card draw to ramp, and you need both of those things to, you know, play your actual cards that are actually going to be part of your strategy and whatnot. And I will put another caveat at the end, but I'm going to discuss that a little bit more in a sec. But anyway, removal, I think that, again, the meta has really shifted quite a lot from a couple of years ago and whatnot. So you need to run a fair bit more removal than what I think you used to. I think you really need to at least have 5 pieces of single target removal for various different things. You can't just have, all of these Pongifier style effects. Maybe you can run 1 or 2 style of like Swords to Plowshares type effects that just kill a creature or get rid of a creature, because yes, sure, you're gonna see creatures at some point, because everyone's got a commander and most people's commanders are a creature, so you're at least gonna see mostly 4 of those at a table for most of the time. And most, again, decks are built specifically around the commander, because that's how the format works. So if you get rid of somebody's commander, it usually is pretty good. Even Golos, which is one of the most difficult commanders to deal with, because it just keeps coming back and getting more lands and whatnot, but still you're slowing them down, hopefully, and they can't Golos activation and whatnot and get free cards and whatnot, this sort of thing, and get out of control and whatnot and all of that sort of stuff. So you still need, do need creature removal, but I would say you need less creature removal. You definitely need artifact and some enchantment removal, which can be difficult for some colors. But you want versatile removal. In other words, you want removal that hits creatures, artifacts, planeswalkers, enchantments, basically nearly every type that there is in the game. So your options for a lot of that stuff is fairly limited, and everyone knows what most of it sort of is. There is some other options like that do sort of like Imprisoned in the Moon style effects and whatnot. Basically, for any permanent or whatever, they turn them into a land or whatever, or a mana rock or a treasure or whatever, things like this. So those cards are pretty good as well, but still you need these effects that are much wider, because again, you never know what you're going to need to deal with. Yeah, most of the time you're going to need to deal with a creature, but when you need to deal with an artifact and a creature and an enchantment sometimes or whatnot, or you never know which of the 3 or 4 or 5 different things, or a planeswalker or whatever, or even a land sometimes. Again, like some people run very powerful lands and you want to answer their lands sometimes, and like it's not the best thing to have to do, but it's like sometimes the thing you have to do. I would even count like graveyard removal like as part of your removal, so maybe you want 5 or 6 just to count some sort of single target graveyard removal, like Bajuka Bog, Scavenger Grounds or whatnot, things like that, because you really need to sometimes slow down. It's just like a board wipe. It's just like another board wipe, actually, in a way, because it's like you're resetting them completely. So I might count this in the board wipe section more so, but it sort of is single target because it's usually only one player that you need to deal with. But again, you do need that style of effect so that you can slow down somebody. You're not often going to stop them completely, but you're probably going to stop them for a few turns, and they're going to need to rebuild, and that's probably your chance to, establish yourself, hopefully, and get into the game and take that player out, maybe, or, devise other things. But still, I would say you need those 5 or so things, and you want them to be as diverse as possible. In terms of board wipes, now this is going to be tough, because there are many different types of decks out there, and many different sort of things that you need to consider. Like, I would say if you're a creature heavy deck, my advice to you would be completely different if you're a creature light deck. Same if you're an artifact heavy deck, or an artifact light deck, or an enchantment heavy or enchantment light deck. That's what I mean. Like, if you're almost all enchantments, if you can find things that say destroy all non-enchantment creatures, then you definitely want those style effects if they're in your colors, because hey, all your stuff's enchantments. Oh well, I guess none of my stuff dies. You want those effects that you know, either are super efficient, like maybe Blasphemous Act or whatever, that you can basically just cast for one or whatever, then basically go about re-establishing your own board with whatever you've got in hand or whatnot, so that you can be the first one to sort of take advantage of a clear board, start dominating or whatnot, and start, you know, dictating the pace of the game. You know, like, that's why people prefer, like, the Wraths that are, you know, 3 or 4 mana, because they're much more efficient, and, you know, they can go, okay, Wrath, and then play a few other things after that, and then, you know, hopefully establish themselves ahead and get into trying to close out the game. But it is hard sometimes, so, you know, but still, it's one of those things. Like, if you're a creature heavy deck, you maybe only want 2 or 3 at the most, I would say. It does depend, but for the most part, you don't want that many of them, unless they're like artifact or enchantment based ones, like you destroy all artifacts, you destroy all enchantments, things like that. Rampage of the Clans is actually pretty darn good because it destroys all artifacts and enchantments and then gives them creatures. Or if you're playing that style of deck where you're playing a lot of artifacts and enchantments, then you can be like, destroy all my own artifacts and enchantments, turn them all into creatures, and then turn them sideways and kill people, because it's an instant as well, so you can just do that before your turn and be like, ba-bam, and kill people. So that's an interesting one, but again, it's a pretty good one that is out there. And, you know, if you're running cards like that, you know, again, it makes what they've got, if you can't really deal with, like, too many of their enchantments or whatnot, or whatever, in many other ways, it's like, oh, okay, cool, now I don't need to deal with them as enchantments or whatnot, now I just need to deal with them as creatures. Oh, look, I just killed them because of something else. Or they're less relevant because now they're just 3/3s or whatever, so they won't, you know, worry me that much. Or if they do, there's something terribly, terribly wrong. But anyway, again, if you're a creature light deck, then you want a few more. But it does depend, again, like, it does depend on what your meta is, again, sort of thing. Like, if you're running into a lot of creature decks, you want a lot more creature-based, you know, board wipes to protect yourself, keep the board clear, keep your game plan going, you know, do whatever you're doing, pillow fort or combo or tutor for your cards, draw for your cards, draw for your combo, find your, you know, find your pieces, whatnot, whatever you're doing, or keep the board clear of opponents' stuff or low, or stuff that just can't deal with your stuff, like destroy each opponent's flying creatures or whatnot, deal damage to each opponent's flying creatures, and then play your own flying creatures, things like that. Again, you want the ones that don't really affect you as much, or that you can take advantage of, like whatever it is, the one Time Warp, whatever it is. No, not Time Warp, because that's the extra turn spell. What's it called? It is something about time, but I can't remember what it's called. It's the blue-white one that bounces one of your own creatures to your hand, and then, you know, bounces all, destroys all creatures, I think, or whatever. That one's pretty decent because it can save your best thing, and then you can replay it. I think there's one, Flood of Tears, that basically does the same thing. That, you know, you can then play something from your hand if so many non-land permanents or whatever return this way or whatever. So that one's pretty good because it lets you re-establish right away as well. So yeah, but again, you know, like, if you're running a lot of artifacts in your deck, you don't want ones that deal with artifacts that much, or you want the ones that help you deal with opponents' artifacts, like the red one, not by force. What's the other one? the Overload one. I can't think of what it's called now. It's one of the best ones though. But yeah, like Heliod's Intervention is also another one that deals with artifacts and or enchantments. And you can do X equals however much you want, which is like a better by force as well. Or you can gain your whole bunch of life, which is sometimes relevant, but sometimes not. But it has that versatility, which is nice. So there's lots of options out there, but again, it depends what your deck's doing. If you're enchantment heavy, you don't want the ones that blow up all enchantments, so, just think about that. But you want maybe 5, or so, I would say. Maybe a few more. It depends how controlling you want to be. I would say my style would be to be less controlling, but again, that's just me personally. But yeah, if you want to be more controlling, you obviously want more wraths and whatnot, and you obviously want less like spot removal per se. You want some spot removal, but you want more counter spells to sort of go in and protect your combo or protect the cards that are your key things to protect what yourself and what you're doing, like Ghostly Prison, Propaganda, those sort of things. They're protecting you. You want to keep them around till you can sort of, make sure you've got enough board wipes and whatnot to keep it clear enough of whatever you're worried about or whatnot, or get the spot removal that you need or whatnot. So yeah, but you want in a certain range. You certainly go to a certain point of going, well, how many tutors am I going to run or whatnot, or how many other cards am I going to run in my deck? And this is where I'm going to start talking about this as well. But how many cards am I actually running that actually are doing the plan of which that I'm doing? And like you guys might have seen this, and you might see this in other deck sort of tutors and whatnot, this sort of style stuff. You go, dude, like, what's going on? Like, you've named 38 lands, 10 ramp, 10 card draw, 5 spot removal, and maybe 3 wraths. So I'm already at like 66 cards or thereabouts or whatnot, roughly, in your deck. So that means plus my commander or whatever now. So now you're at 67, right? So there's not a lot left. There's 33 cards left in your deck that are the cards that you're actually, playing with, like, within your synergies and whatnot and whatever. And that sounds like an incredibly low percent of what your deck is, but some cards like the Great Henge and a few other cards and whatnot, I'm going to say can find dual purposes. So some cards, like I said, like Command Sphere and Hedron Archive and whatnot, some of those cards can find dual purpose. They can be mana ramp, but they also can be sort of counted as card draw. I would count Hedron Archive maybe as card draw because it actually nets you an additional card, whereas, Command Sphere doesn't really net you an extra card, nor does Mind Stone, so I don't really count them as card draw. I count them as a cantrip, essentially. But they're an alright cantrip for the most part as well, so I wouldn't discount them as not doing anything in that regard. I would just count them as maybe half of a card draw, more than it's actually, part of my card draw package. But if you're in a deck that struggles with card draw, I certainly think that Hedron Archive sort of falls into that space of going, yeah, it actually is card draw sometimes because I'll often cash it in or whatnot when I do need it. But anyway, like, again, you're down to like a very slim number, but again, even when you're starting to say, well, some of these cards are gonna, form into, multiple places, you're still not dealing with a lot of stuff that your deck's going to do. But even though that doesn't sound like a lot, and it isn't a lot, like I sort of said, at some points you start going, like you either have two problems, which is, one, you either have like nearly 1,000 cards that you want to play, or whatever, you have a heap of cards that you just want to play and just jam in there, and you're struggling to find room to cut all of it or whatnot. Or you've got too few cards, you've only got like 5 to 10 cards or whatever, that you go, these are the cards that I want to play, and I don't really want to play many of these other cards because they're not that good or that amazing or whatever. They don't do that much for me, whatever, or they don't do that much, they don't have that big of an impact. Sometimes you've got to run cards just to be like, well, I need to get to 100, and I don't know enough other cards, or I can't find enough other cards that are really, exactly on theme, but like maybe I can find some minor sub theme that's in my deck that I want to build some synergies around, and some of that is, crossover sort of synergy as well. So there are some other things that you sort of look at when you're deck building and whatnot, and you go, well, this isn't directly on what I'm doing. And, again, you don't want to build too much around some of these cards, which is, one of those things where you go, these cards have to do something that's just generically okay. It's all right, little bit of value if I happen to get it. Don't worry about, like, it's the main part of the deck or whatever, or I really care about getting it. If I happen to get it, I get it, but if I don't worry about it. So those are the sort of cards that I find, like Ivy Lane Dennison, and a couple cards that are like that. Renata is another card that's very like that, where whenever your creatures enter, they get a +1/+1 counter. It's just a fine little piece of value that, makes sometimes your smaller creatures bigger, makes your bigger creatures even bigger, and whatnot, things like that. If you have Rhythm of the Wild, now you don't even have to choose as much. You get the counter and you get the haste, or you get 2 counters, or whatnot. So, like, you get even more benefit, things like that. And in saying that, how much support pieces, like perhaps Rhythm of the Wild and Ivy Lane Dennison, Renata, do you want to run? Like, I don't think you want to run too many of them, but there are some really good ones that are out there, like Cathar's Crusade, and there are certainly some really powerful ones that a lot of people do run, like Parallel Lives, Doubling Season, and whatnot, these sorts of cards, because they're just insanely good and just very powerful, as we all know, because, they're run to great effect, and when you double up, making a token, suddenly you go from 2 tokens to 4 tokens, and suddenly you go from 4 tokens to 8 tokens. So, when you start just amassing tokens very quickly, it gets out of hand, and is quite fun for you and quite scary for your opponent. So there are different things that do different things, that help you out. It does depend on what your strategy is, but I wouldn't shoot for too many of these sort of style effects. Like, you can say Wound Reflection is sort of an extra value sort of card. It doesn't really matter that much what you're doing with it. It's still extra value if your opponents are losing life, through whatever you're doing, they're losing extra life. Hell Rider is another one that's sort of like that. If you're attacking, triggers essentially, or the number of attacking creatures ping for an additional damage. So that's pretty good, just good value, things like that. So, you want a few of those effects, but not too many. But the rest of your deck is all synergy pieces. It's all about whatever your deck is doing. So if you're a Voltron deck, you want all the other pieces to be like either equipment or the things that help you find equipment, like Heliod's, Pilgrim, or whatever, things that tutor them up, things that look at the top 5 cards, even though you could say that that's card draw. I don't really count this as card draw and put it to your hand. Like, it's not card draw, it's a cantrip again. Cantrips are just fine, like tutoring's just fine. Like, I don't love it, but again, it's just fine. It's just another, like, you know, adding something to your hand that you need or whatnot, or adding something to your graveyard, like entombing it or whatever. Things like that, those are just fine as well. So there are a few other cards, like, yeah, you get your cards that say whenever, you know, when you do something with it, you can get back an artifact or enchantment from your graveyard or whatever, like Buried Ruin or whatever it is, things like that, or some of the creatures that do it or whatnot, or an equipment. And some, again, when you have some of these synergy pieces, again, like Sword of the Animist and the new Sword of Hearth and Home, that can be, those are ramp pieces, but they're also part of your Voltron plan because they go onto your commander or whatever and help you kill people with the fact that you've got your dude suited up and whatnot. But they also help you ramp and help you play more equipment or whatever you're doing. Or if you've just got an evasive creature, you're just like, I'm getting it in there because it's evasive and, you know, it gets me a source of mana. Actually, whatever it is, Prying Blade and the Pickaxe from Kaldheim, those two that make treasures when you attack are pretty darn good because it nets you mana that you can use and whatnot. So those ones are pretty darn good as well. And they're consistent over more turns, so you can keep making mana with them. The sword, what's the sword that, you know, you give them you give someone 2 or 3 plants or whatever it is, and, you know, when you hit Dowsing Dagger, I thought of it just as I was saying it. You know, Dowsing Dagger is another card that's same sort of thing. It's another piece that, you know, is an equipment. You know, if you want to flip it into a land or whatever, you can. If you don't need to, you just, like, leave it there, you know, and do other things with it. So, you know, it's ramp as well as being like, or it's sort of ramp as well as being like an okay equipment that you want to use. So, yeah. Again, it's going to vary from what I'm saying exactly because I'm just taking some generic options or generic things that I'm thinking of, or, you know, this is how you can say, oh, well, I have 10 ramps or sources in my deck, but, you know, 3 or 4 of them are equipment or whatever it is, but they're cheap, efficient equipment that are going to give me something every other turn, so I do count them as ramp still because they're doing it all the time, or, you know, whatever. Some of my card draw can be on equipment or whatnot. Things like that, even if it's a cantrip, you know, it's once you start getting 2 or 3 things that cantrip, you know, with those things, it's like, well, now I'm drawing 3 cards every turn, you know, and whatnot, things like that. So that adds up, and now it's like, well, now it's just not cantrips, now it's actual, you know, card draw or whatnot. So when you start getting those things stacked up, it's like, well, now it's actually worth it, you know. But yeah, like, the rest of the other cards, besides, like, the main support cards that you actually, you know, like, or just, like, generic sort of synergy pieces or whatever, that are just in the deck just because, you know, they're generically good enough, like, Eternal Witness, like, again, like, those sorts of things, they're just in the deck probably because they're really good on their own and you don't really need much else to go with them. You know, so besides those maybe 4 or 5, like, flex slots that you might go and throw some of these just generically good cards in, you know, the rest of the deck, again, is just, like, what are you doing? And then going, okay, well, what fits into what I'm doing? what are the best cards that I can fit into that are in my colors, and yeah, just go for it, you know. But I could do more specific things and discuss more specific archetypes and whatnot. Again, if you guys want to hear or see that here on the channel, let me know, and let me know what you think about this. Write your thoughts down there in the comments. I hope you've liked this, and if you have, yeah, let me know what you guys think. Write it all down there in the comments below. If you would like to further support the channel, you can go onto our Patreon. You can also get social with us on our Facebook. To follow all the updates, make sure you hit the like button, and on our Discord. To get into it, please leave a comment and I'll send you an invite. All links are in the description. Hey, you've just finished watching one of our videos. A bunch of other videos are popping up on your screen now for you to check out, so why not check them out? I hope you have enjoyed this video here today.